Hello and welcome to the Garden of the Black Roses. This is fanfiction! So this is the continuation of my Ragnarok Online Fanfiction. Chapter 5. Bright Eyes sat casting firefly lights out into her dark room. She wondered what on earth was going on. Getting up, she went to the window and looked out at the starry sky. Behind her something fell. Looking back, she saw that her tarot cards had fallen to the ground. As she began to pick them up, she noticed all but two were face down. Death and the Hanging Man. She was still learning to read the cards and wasn't sure what those two meant exactly, but she knew that it wasn't a good sign. Bells rang throughout the headquarters, and Bright Eyes got up and ran out of the door, leaving her cards on the ground. Catching up to Illusions, who was also running out towards the main hall, she asked, "What's going on?" "Contra's attacking," she said quickly, as she strapped her jewels on. "Lack wants everyone to their positions now before Contra gets through the front door." "Everyone ready?" Lack yelled to the guild members. Chibi covered her ears as everyone roared in response. Contra broke part of the huge double doors and stepped inside. Furama and Tadakono were ready and began to cast Stormgust, pushing Contra back outside again. Chibi threw her bombs to create a wall of fire across the door, then ran back behind Lack so she wouldn't get killed with sacrifice ritual. Contra laughed as his weapon broke and cried, "You think your little attacks will hurt me?" He cast Grand Cross, catching both Furama and Tadakono in it, and both of them went down. He then threw his shield at Chibi's stomach, knocking her down into the ground hard. Lack looked furious. He began to throw his spears fast. Kakaki cast Berserk on herself and began to wear down Contra's armor with her jaws. Bright Eyes, Trelawney, Ferrari Sin, and Illusions jumped in too, to also help break up Contra's armor with their critical attacks. Contra just continued to laugh. Blood dripped from him as he cast Endure. He walked towards Lack like as if the 5 assassins were just annoying flies. "I just can't watch this anymore!" cried Syao as he ran in with Leaf to attack Contra. But even them using Spiral Pierce didn't slow Contra down. Mina closed her eyes and turned into a stalker. She looked towards Phenomenon, who nodded, and she ran to divest and sightless raid Contra. Phenomenon healed Furama and Tadakono. Both wizards were furious at how Contra could just brush them aside and ran after him, casting Firebolt and Soul Strike. Contra was unstoppable. He continued to walk directly to Lack. Chibi sat up painfully to try and slow Contra down. Contra raised his sword and slashed Lack across the chest. "No!" cried Syao, and she ran to Lack's side and started to heal him. Contra pushed her aside and raised his sword. Lack looked up dazed for a second. Down swung the sword. Lack blinked and saw priest robes blocking his view of Contra. He could hear Chibi and the other guild members calling out the priest's name in horror. "He's after you, Lack," croaked Phenomenon, as he held the sword tightly. Lack got up slowly and saw the sword had gone straight through Phenomenon's stomach. "Run, Lack. Get stronger, so he can't kill you." Contra barked a laugh and pushed the sword in deeper. Phenomenon cried out in agony before falling limp against Contra's blade. Lack looked at Phenomenon in horror. Looking up at Contra, he growled, "You're going to pay." Taking out his medallion, he called Black Rose. Tossing some blue potions to Chibi, he barked, "Toss these at me when you can." Chibi nodded and a gust of wind blew. Black Rose appeared behind Lack with Shadow and Novus. Lack looked back at Black Rose and nodded. Black Rose nodded back and looked at the two other hidden gods. Novus darted to Contra's left. Shadow warped through the shadows to the back of the room and came up at Contra from behind. Black Rose darted to Contra's right, and Lack stood his ground in front of Contra. Chibi stood and balanced herself with her saber. The ground shook as the three hidden gods and Lack cast fury. "Assure strike!" Contra staggered. The Fight Club Guild members retreated as the three hidden gods and Lack prepared Ashura again. Chibi pitched Lack blue potions, quickly restoring his magical strength. Tadakono ran to Phenomenon's side and placed a hand on his forehead. Closing his eyes, he began to pray quietly. Light glowed around him. "Assure strike!" Contra fell to one knee and laughed mockingly. "Is this the best you can do? You can never kill me." Chibi pitched to Lack again, and the four assured Contra one last time. Contra fell dead into a pool of his own blood. Balos walked up and poked Contra to see if he was still alive before encasing him in a crystal tomb. "Contra," he said formally, "you will be forever bound within this tomb. You will never be reborn again in this world. Never again to harm another living soul." Shadow and Balos carried the crystal tomb and warped through the shadows to the castle. Black Rose stayed behind and looked over to Lack. "This isn't over, you know," she said quietly. "There are others in the Paladin Order who may not be as strong as Contra, but are smarter than him. And it looks like you're their target. Be very careful." "Don't worry about me," Lack said, with one eye watching Tadakono. "I worry about my guild members, though." "Don't worry too much," Black Rose said, smiling. "You're about to see something that you never thought was possible." And with that, she flew upwards and disappeared through a window. "Something I think is impossible, huh?" Lack thought, looking at Tadakono and Phenomenon. His eyes opened wide as Phenomenon sat up. "How did you... When could you..." Lack began to try and say. Tadakono smiled. "It's a rare ability I possess. Not something I want to boast about. I can resurrect people better than a priest can." Phenomenon was stretching his arms and legs and moved about like as if he was never hurt at all. "He's right," he said, finally getting up and walking around with ease. "I feel as good as I was yesterday. Better even." Lack sat heavily down in a chair, in a mixture of shock and surprise. "Well," he began, "it's good to know you possess this ability." Tadakono nodded. "I agree." Chapter 6. Kashi stood on the topmost point of the castle and spread his hands wide. His creation hovered in front of him for a second before stretching as far as the eye could see. It blanketed Midgard with a light grey mist. Far below the castle in the clouds, paladins found their sacrifice ritual diminishing in power. Champions and monks were unable to snap as fast or assure as hard as they used to. As the mist seeped into the ground, surrounding everyone and everything, the change took effect. Kashi relaxed and smiled. Power within Midgard was now balanced. Blackrose stepped out onto the balcony with Shadow and Balos. Together the three watched as the light grey mist spread out around the castle. The mist wrapped itself around them tightly. Blackrose cried out in pain. Shadow knelt down holding her head, and Balos began to tremble uncontrollably. When the mist had settled, the three sat on the ground looking at each other. Shadow grasped around her body looking for her jewels, and was shocked when she found none. "Let's go to Kashi," Balos said softly, when he noticed their wings were missing. Getting up, they ran to the topmost tower. "Yes, I rolled the world back," Kashi said calmly. "That means powers that you had before you became mediators have disappeared." He turned to face them. "I'll restore them now, though." Spreading his fingers out wide, he sent power at the three. Shadow and Balos's bat wings grew fast and stretched. The leathery webs on their wings billowed slightly from the rush of power from Kashi. Blood trickled down their backs from where the wings had sprouted out of their backs. They kneeled, blocking their ears to Blackrose's screams as her own wings grew a bit more slower. Her black feather wing tips were laced with blood as she shook, gripping onto anything she could find. The three knelt with their heads bowed in front of Kashi. Touching each one on their head in turn, she restored their weapons and powers. However, a few problems occurred. "It seems Rudra will only appear for you," Kashi said, puzzled, looking at Blackrose. Rudra hovered and glittered in front of her. He looked over at Balos. 2 weapons hovered in front of him. An Angramanu and a Balmung? Kashi mused to himself. Strangest of all was Shadow. No longer did her jewels appear, but instead 2 strange new swords hovered in front of her. "Turfings," Kashi said in surprise. "Turfings?" Shadow asked, taking both by the grip. Light glowed, and the weapons sealed themselves to her. Blackrose leaned across to touch one, and it melted to her touch. Shadow placed her hand on the puddle of the turfing, and it returned back to its sword form. Isn't a turfing a monster? A turfing sword! Kashi began. Is a one-handed sword, which is rumoured to bring a horrible fate to its owner. Be wary about it, and don't use them too often. Shadow nodded and sheathed them into her belt. Balos sheathed Balmung and Angramanu. Blackrose fumbled a bit before finding a way to sling Rudra over her body, with its leather pouch of various arrow types. Tadakono sat twitching as Phenomenon thanked him for the millionth time. Lack sat watching them. Chibi laughed as Lack rolled his eyes. Lack looked around the dining room and sighed. He wondered how much of their strength had been diminished. He looked sidelong at Chibi. She gained new stronger skills, which in his mind was all well and good, but it didn't make up for all of those who had been weakened. Blinking, he noticed all the assassin crosses were missing. "Lack!" Bright Eyes cried, running into the dining room with Illusions, Ferrarisen, and Trelawney. "Come, look!" She dragged Lack from his chair and out of the dining room. Ever curious, Chibi followed, with Tadakono and Phenomenon following after her. Reaching the assassin training room, Bright Eyes pulled Trelawney over to the benches where Bright Eyes pulled Lack over to the benches where Trelawney ran into the middle. Illusions ran to one of the 2 baskets on the opposite side of the room. "Oh!" she cried. "There's no more dead branches!" She picked up a strange red skull-shaped bottle. She tossed it to Trelawney. "Trey, catch!" "What's the point?" Trelawney asked. "There's no dead branches to show him what this does." "We have a creator here," Ferrarisen said softly. "Chibs, summon some parasite." Chibi made a face and walked into the middle of the room. Pulling a plant bottle from her pouch, she threw it to the ground. "Summon Flora!" 2 parasite appeared and promptly began to throw seeds at Trelawney. Chibi shook her head. "I don't get why Summon Flora still activates it, but when it's all different plant monsters now." Trelawney shrugged and drank the contents of the red skull bottle. Lack's eyes widened as he saw Trelawney became obviously poisoned. "She's killing herself," he said, surprised. Bright Eyes put a finger on his lips and smiled before looking at Trelawney. Trelawney darted between the parasite with amazing speed, her eyes clear and focused despite being poisoned. Knowing she only had a little bit of time before she needed to rest and heal, she attacked the parasite. "Meteor strike! Soulbreaker! Soulbreaker!" Lack fell off his seat. The damage and speed from her being poisoned was incredible. Smiling to himself as he got up, he knew this made up for the decreases in power on some of the other classes. And that's it. I think I'm probably going to continue to record 2 chapters each file. Oh. But yeah, that's it. Now, while I'm reading that, if you've never played Ragnarok Online, you'd be like, what is she talking about? What are turfings? What a parasite? What a... and, they're just different mobs that are in the game. It's, yeah, strange. They are lots of strange names. And a lot of the weapons have strange names too. And I'm pretty sure I'm probably not pronouncing half of them correctly. But anyway, that's it for this one. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me if you are someone who played RO Revolution back in the day. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one. And as always, let your imagination grow wild. Bye for now.